Hi, I'm Justin Reed, and I'm reading on. So today's topic is about coda interpreters, and I'll be talking about my personal experiences, what I've seen, and what people have told me. I'm going to be comparing coda interpreter experiences with hearing interpreter experiences, and discuss how moving forward we can better work together. Hello to all the mother-father deaf interpreters and all the hearing interpreters. So there's a lot of coda interpreters who are very proud that they're coda interpreters. They sometimes like the label that they have deaf parents, or sometimes they don't like that label. It's to each their own, and that's totally fine. We all have that same common experience growing up in the deaf community with our deaf parents. And that experience is really precious. Learning their culture, their language, their experiences, everything, that it all gets transferred to us. That common experience we have growing up becomes an intrinsic skill. In addition to this, we see a lot of interpreters, their work, their experiences, and it starts to become a intrinsic personal thing. So some of you go to interpreting schools and you graduate, and your experiences growing up and that gut feeling, that intrinsic feeling you have, plus school and graduating from an interpreting program, all of that gets put into one skilled package, and you really start to learn and grow from that. Some coda interpreters, after all of this, they start to compare themselves with hearing interpreters who, they go to their interpreting programs, they have PhDs, and they feel like they outweigh all the skills that hearing interpreters have. But I have to warn you to not try to weigh your experiences as better than theirs. It can be equal. It's important, interpreting programs that they go to and the skills that you've developed. It's important to recognize coda experiences growing up and recognize those intrinsic skills that they have and recognize the deaf community transference into codas. It's important to recognize that. So a lot of codas, the thought pops up that, oh, I want to just become an interpreter. Um, so you look at back at interpreting history, and we codas have always been involved in the coda or in the interpreting profession. 39 years ago, there were three women that tried to set up Alvec. So the three women that started to interact with the deaf community, with codas, with um, deaf schools, different workshops, and they started all this discussion about it's how it's time to set up AVLC. They also discussed and thought it was time to set up an interpreting program. So they worked together to set up their own institution for that. So I was curious to see the history of AVLC, and so I investigated to find CODAs who had been through that program. I found two. One was from 1980, and one was from 1986. So I looked back, and I found one more. So I couldn't find their actual name. It just wasn't really listed anywhere. So the acting president of that organization, um, it didn't have the name listed, and I wondered why. I also looked into AVLC members, and there's around 800 members. And I wanted to know how many of those were CODAs and had certificates. I checked through it, and I found only 19 that were certified. And inside, I felt conflicted. Why only 19? I mean, with CODAs, this is our first language. I mean, and in the deaf community, their experiences, a lot of them we understand and know about inside ourselves. So how is it possible that only 19 CODAs have certificates in this whole setup? So as I was wondering why, I thought maybe it's possible that the schools weren't supporting CODAs, or hearing interpreters were looking down at CODAs and thinking, oh, they're already skilled and their English is weak. Um, or maybe CODA students just weren't going to those interpreting programs and they didn't feel like it fit them. Or maybe they weren't hiring on CODA teachers that could understand and help those CODAs graduate. There were, so many possibilities. So I thought, okay, yeah, this needs to change. I thought we need to start advocating and start recognizing the importance of CODA experiences growing up and try to cater to the individual skills that CODAs have so that we can all work together and try to improve it on the future. So I thought, yeah, it's time to start feeling that CODA pride, and because we do have the skills, so it's time to start, really encouraging CODAs to do that. Around 5 months ago, I went to an interpreter meeting. I went in, I looked at that presentation, and the presentation was trying to set up a committee for um, culture influence, culture committee. So I looked at that and I saw that it mentioned CODA. So I said, "Hey, I'll offer my part to help out with that with CODAs." After a lot of heated debate, and I felt a lot of sort of internal anguish, um, deaf, hearing, people were coming up to me, making comments, and here are some of the comments. They said, "Oh, well, CODA? They've never experienced discrimination. They've never experienced prejudice or anything like that." There's some other comments such as, "Well, CODAs, they have it easy. They can transfer between the deaf world and the hearing world, no problem." And I do wish it was easy, but it's not. It's really hard. It's difficult. So after that meeting, there was still discussion, and I was thankful for the presentation. It was approved. Uh, but inside, I still felt a little bit dismissed by the whole process. So I went to workshops, trainings, and sometimes I was sort of questioning and seeing something that just made me feel off. Hearing interpreters would walk up to me, they would give their presentation, and they would thank CODAs for all their hard work and how much they treasured and valued us. And so I'd sit there and I'd be looking at this and I'd be like, okay, thank you for letting me know, but I sometimes see a lot of dismissiveness towards CODAs and towards their experiences and towards their skills, their knowledge. And I thought that's just not fair. Amy Williams, her article, which was titled, I missed the title, but it was talking about the sign language interpreter profession. And it really hit me that there's one thing that struck me. With CODAs, we're not hearing and we're not deaf, and we don't get looked at or valued in the way that we maybe should be by either community. Hearing interpreters, they look at CODAs and they think, oh, wow, they're so skilled, they're ready to go. And that can be a form of dismissiveness. With CODA interpreters, we're experienced with both worlds, hearing and deaf. But now it's time that we all recognize CODA interpreters and recognize their intrinsic skills and recognize their experiences growing up in the deaf world and their skills in the profession. And I also want to recommend that we allow CODAs to share their experiences and their skills. Just allow them to bring their voice to the table. In the deaf community and their parents, their languages, uh, allow us to share those experiences with you. It's time to recognize CODA experiences because I feel like we're equal to those who have a lot of experience in deaf and hearing communities. In interpreting programs in Canada, I looked through and I wanted to see how many CODAs have gotten experience. And I found just two teachers. And I feel like there should be more because CODA teachers can help with a lot of different things. For example, they can teach individuals, they can teach deaf and hearing workshops and how to transfer between the two. They can teach how to trade between the two cultures of hearing and deaf. They can teach how to be more creative and apply to your ASL skills to real life experiences. And it's also important for interpreting programs to recognize CODA experiences and how their experiences growing up relates to the deaf community. I really strongly believe that all interpreting programs should have at least one CODA teacher. they're so immersed in the culture that they can teach it, and I think it would only bring positives because we've learned from the deaf community and their language, their culture, and their experiences, and we've already grown up with that our entire lives, and now we're able to teach that to others. I feel like this would really be worth it, and it'd really be important to have CODA teachers. The article I referred to, it was from Joseph Fairgate, and this is an article titled uh, ITP. How can we have our staff make an impact to have interpreters ready to work? And he talked about 4 things. So the first was staff should have a voice, they should have an interpreter, they should have a CODA, and they should have a CDI. And I feel like that was really important to really get a full impact on deaf students. He said CODA already has the language skills, and they tend to grow up in the deaf community. And they understand the deaf community and what they need and what matches them. And this doesn't mean that hearing interpreters and or hearing interpreters and CODA interpreters aren't equal. We just have to start encouraging all interpreter and interpreter programs to start pulling from all the available resources, including CODAs. I feel like if we were to start to do that, we would really teach students a lot more and be a lot more effective at doing that. I feel like that pulling from all resources would help garner respect for the deaf community. So what do we do moving forward? Obviously, we need to start working together to discuss how to, better move forward, how to learn from each other. And it's important that we all respect CODA experiences as well, and CODA interpreters with their skills and their knowledge, and allow CODA interpreters to express how they feel. A CODA interpreter and their experiences growing up from their skills and their knowledge, and you compare it with um, a hearing interpreter who goes and gets their information from interpreting programs, both of those combined, I think, are equal. And I think it's time for those two groups to start respecting each other a bit more. I know sometimes it can be kind of a tough discussion between the two. Like, for example, a CODA teacher who, some people might say, oh, he's not qualified, he's just there because he's a CODA. Or if you see a CODA interpreter who tells a story about the deaf community and about their experiences, and you criticize them, well, hold off on that before you start looking down on him, and just take a step back, really try to understand where he's coming from and get the full picture. What's in their mind, what's in their soul, their body, their spirit. Try to get the full picture of that. Plus, how CODAs relate to the deaf community, and try to involve that in the big picture as well. And you can see how rich of a story that is, and how much we can add to the profession of interpreting. So I think, recognition plus perspective plus experience will, I think, help everyone. And, for the deaf community, for many years, you've given us your advice, your language, your culture, your values. You've always given that to CODAs. And so we understand that, and we have that sort of detailed knowledge. So I want to thank the deaf community for that. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Is there more on this? No, not really.